Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our Punch Needle Tufted Ornament class, where we are going to be making some adorable tufted nutcrackers that will then turn into ornaments, and you can put them on your tree. And these are definitely inspired by a collection at Michael's right now that's called the Sprinkle Shop. So if you haven't seen it yet, it's really cute. It's got bright colors. It's very candy themed. So these nutcrackers will have some extra whipped cream and some sprinkles and some other things like that just to keep it extra festive. So if you've never punch needled before, this is a good class for you to kind of get in the hang of what this is all about. I'll teach you some of the basics. I'll show you this template, this pattern that I'm using for the nutcracker. And then if you want to craft along with me today, those of you who are online with me, we can do that. And if you want to watch this video again later, it will be up on YouTube on Monday. And then the pattern will also still be underneath. When you click on the more under the YouTube video, you'll be able to get this link to be able to do the pattern, print it out, take your time with it, and really take all the things that you've learned in class today and turn them into a beautiful nutcracker. So here we go. We're going to get started by talking about some of the supplies. So the most important supply is going to be something called a punch needle. And a punch needle usually has a wooden handle and has a metal end over here. And there's a little hole in the metal end, and that's where you're going to be threading yarn through. And then the whole point of punch needle is you literally punch it through fabric, and you're punching yarn through fabric in order to create something that's tufted, or something that on one side it's going to be pretty fluffy, and on the other side you're going to see some stitches. And we're going to be able to take those and eventually turn this into an ornament using some felt and some hot glue. So another important element that you'll need for class today is something called monk's cloth. And monk's cloth is very different from Aida cloth. Aida cloth is usually what you use for cross stitch. It's very stiff and starchy, so that when you do your needle point, it kind of stays. Monk's cloth is a lot more flexible. And also what's nice about monk's cloth is that it's super woven. So what happens when I stick this punch needle through is that the weaving bits kind of part, and if I just press underneath it with my fingers, see how that hole disappears? So it's kind of like the fibers go around the punch needle, and then they hold the yarn into it. They'll keep a loop back here, and that's how we're able to create these cute little tufted looks. So these tufted looks have been showing up everywhere on pillows, on a lot of interior decorating kind of options. So we're going to be focusing today on our ornament. But you could definitely turn this into a pillow. You could turn this into a wall hanging. There's lots of other things you could do with it. So I have a piece of monk's cloth right here that's probably about 12 by 12 inches. It doesn't have to be this large, but monk's cloth usually does come in a pretty sizable roll. So feel free to have more than enough, especially on your first project, because you eventually can use some of the smaller pieces on other projects. But I also have an embroidery hoop. It can be metal, it can be wood, or it can be plastic. And I recommend for the template I have today that you use an 8-inch hoop. But if you want to shrink the template I have today and use more of a 6-inch hoop, you can do that too. So I'm using an 8-inch hoop today, but feel free to use whatever you have and just shrink your template accordingly. I'm going to go ahead and twist this and get it nice and tight. You always want your monk's cloth to be in here a little bit like a drum, so you shouldn't have too much sagging. You want to try and get it as taut as you possibly can. So I'm going to be using my fingers to kind of pull this out, and definitely keep tightening that screw at the top of your hoop to get yourself a nice surface to be doing your punch needle on. Now, there is something with each one of these punch needle tools. You will get something that looks like this. It's like two pieces of wire that are put together with a little piece of tape right here. This is used for threading your punch needle. So threading your punch needle can be a little bit tricky, so you need a little tool to help you out. And these double wires come through that tool right down here. This is where you put your yarn in, and then you're going to pull your yarn through the punch needle because all of this is hollow. And then you're going to be able to have yarn coming out of a skein that you can just punch and go all around your design. So I will show you some of those basics of punch needle. Before I get into the actual nutcracker, I do want to take a moment and kind of show you some of the punch needle techniques. So if you haven't already printed out your nutcracker, you might have a minute or two to be able to do that while I'm kind of showing you some punch needle basics. Right now, I'm just taking like a scrap piece of monk's cloth that I happen to have over here, and I'm going to put it into a smaller hoop just to kind of show you some of those punch needle basics before we get going. And then we'll transfer the design and we'll work on all of those parts of the nutcracker together. So here's just a little scrap of monk's cloth into a different hoop so I can show you. I'll move this template out of the way, but feel free to print that template out if you haven't already. And I'm going to take any color. So I'm going to start with this loops and thread purple. A lot of the yarn that we're using today, actually all the yarn we're using today, is loops and threads. So there's so many different colors, especially in the Impeccable. And this is a 3, which is a medium worsted weight of yarn. So we're going to be, or a 4, sorry. We're going to be using 3s and 4s, I think mostly 4s today. It's just a really nice thickness for the yarn to be able to go in and out of this monk's cloth with this particular punch needle. And these come in so many pretty different colors. So between the soft classics, like this one and this purple, and the Impeccable yarn, you're definitely going to be able to find whatever colors you want. We're going to have this kind of palette where I'm going to do purple. I'm going to have my nutcracker have a silly orange wig on. I'm going to do some white, and then you can choose whatever color skin tone you want to. Also, we have really great different colors available in the Impeccable that you can match lots of different kinds of skin tones, or you can make something just silly and outlandish too if you don't want to do something more precise. So here is my punch needle, and here are the wires I was telling you about before. So I'm sticking this little threading device through this hollow punch needle. And then here are these 2 little wires you can see. I'm going to put the yarn in between those 2 wires like this. I'm going to pull a little bit more out of my skein. And then I'm going to pull on the flag right here. And I'm going to pull that yarn all the way through my punch needle till it comes out the other end. And then I'm going to try and keep my threading needle on my computer over here because Lord knows I'm going to try and not lose it during this class. It's so small that it's easy to kind of lose track of when you're working on a project with lots of different items. All right, there's one more bit of threading. So you'll notice that this punch needle also has one little hole up here. It looks like a flute. So you're going to take the end of this and it's going to go out that one little hole. And now this is officially threaded. So you stick the threading instrument through, put the yarn, pull that yarn all the way through this punch needle, and then put it through that one hole coming out the back. And this is what a threaded punch needle looks like. Now we have our monk's cloth on an embroidery hoop. And so to start punch needle, here's a tail. I'm going to do 1 punch through the fabric, and I'm going to flip over my hoop and I'm going to grab the tail. And you don't need a ton of tail, so you might have seen me just pull on the punch needle to pull back some of this yarn to make a shorter tail. But you have a tail, and the tail is on the bad side of your work. And then you're going to pull the punch needle up, and you're going to drag it across the punch needle material, the monk's cloth, and then you're going to punch it back down, all the way down. And then you're going to pull it up. And you don't pull the needle away from the fabric, you keep it really nice and close and kind of drag it along the fabric. And as you're dragging it along the fabric and then punching it down, what's happening is you're creating a row of stitches. So this row of stitches is what we're going to be using to make our design. And on the other side, you have a row of loops. So with different punch needle projects, sometimes you want the fluffy side and that's going to be your finished project. And sometimes you want the stitches. So one question in the chat asks, do you knot the tail? And you actually don't knot the tail. And what's going to happen is we're going to put a lot of stitches pretty close together. And so the back of your work starts to get pretty packed back here. And it really, it's a little bit freaky on this other side. So you have this side and then here's the side. You don't need to have a knot in the tail because it will stay here. And then at the very end with all your loops, you can put an adhesive, you can use hot glue, you can use felt, and you can really attach it to something in case you are worried about these loops coming out. But the beauty of the monk's cloth is that when it goes through, the monk's cloth kind of closes around your loop and it holds a loop in place. So you can pull these back out, but the monk's cloth is doing its job holding these loops over here. So then you can just keep going and you can do your punch needle and you can follow whatever lines are on your design, and we'll be tracing those next. And then you can fill it in and do all different things like that. If I pull my punch needle too far away, you'll see that it's not going to make a good stitch. It's going to make a very loose, weird looking stitch. So that's why I'm just barely pulling it up and dragging that opening along the fabric. I'm not pulling it away from the fabric and then going down, because that's going to create these really loose, messed up stitches. But you can undo the stitches pretty easily just by gently pulling. And then I can go back to where I was and keep this nice and tight just by pulling on the end of my yarn. And you can go back and fix any stitches that you might want to fix. Now, when you're done with a section or done with a color, and we're going to be changing colors a lot, you want to end your work on the bad side. So for us, the bad side is where all the loops are. I'm going to grab this yarn and I'm pulling the punch needle away from my work, and I have a really big extra loop right here. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut that loop, and that's going to free up my punch needle. Now, all of the tail from the very beginning and any tail from the end, you clip those down, and then those just end up hiding in with the rest of the loops. So if we wanted to use the fluffy side, you don't want to knot over here because you won't even see those, because now they're hidden and they're all the same height with the loops. So that's how we're going to do the basics of punch needle. Now, going back to our particular project, I have a template for you that's a little nutcracker, and this is going to fit nicely on an 8-inch hoop. So I already have my fabric in the 8-inch hoop. I'm going to take this picture, and the way I'm going to transfer this template is I'm going to put it underneath my fabric. And depending on the lighting in your room or where you are, you should be able to see enough of the design in order to trace it. I also recommend either a light box. I might even take one of my lights from up here and put it down here so that we can see it a little better. Or if you see how that just illuminates that pattern very easily with that light underneath. Or you can hold it up to a window. That's always a really good idea too. And we are going to take some kind of marker or felt tip pen. It can be one of the washable fabric pens in order to trace this design onto our fabric. We're going to cover the entire design, and then we're going to even cut it out to make the ornament. So it doesn't really matter what pen or marking tool you use. I'm going to use a Sharpie so that you can all see what I'm doing, and a Sharpie would be fine for you to use also. So before I go ahead and do that, I'm going to cut this design down. I'm going to cut the circle down a little bit so that it fits into my hoop a little better. And I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape to keep it underneath when I'm about to trace it. And I've kind of decided, when I first made this pattern, I had him in a little uniform, but I kind of decided that I like just doing the face. So I'm not going to trace this extra part of the uniform, but you can if you want your Nutcracker to be wearing his official uniform. I'm going to put this in here. And this is fitting pretty nicely, but if you have a piece of masking tape to kind of keep it in place, you can do that. And then I'm going to use my light to help me out. And I'm going to trace this pattern onto my Monkscloth. So feel free to ask me questions in the chat as we work on this together. I think this entire project will probably take you about an hour and a half. This class is an hour, so we're going to get as much of it done as we can together. but I might need to switch over a little bit to one of my finished projects to kind of show you how to do the very end and how to turn your punch needle into an ornament. So I hope that some of you are able to craft along with me. And if you have ever tried punch needle before, let me know in the chat. Or if you've never tried punch needle and you're curious about it, let me know so I know if you have any practice with this yet or if this is brand new to you. So I'm just going through. Here's my cute little nose. He's got this big mustache that takes up the majority of his face. And then he has this goatee or kind of beard situation down here. So the question is asking, what kind of marker are you using? And right now I'm using a Sharpie, but feel free to use anything. I would use felt tip so that it glides along. Something with a felt tip would be nice. Probably ballpoint or pencil would be too difficult to trace with. So something with a felt tip would be nice for you to do. And we have some newbies to punch needle. So my Nutcracker has a little cup of hot cocoa on the top with some ice cream, but you could turn this into a cupcake. You could turn this into lots of different things to kind of fit into the sprinkle shop. You don't have to do the exact same little crown. You could make him have a donut for a hat or something adorable like that. So keep that in mind, personalize it your own way, but I just traced all the basics. So now we're ready to get started with our punch needle. I'm going to go ahead and put my light to the side. And I'm going to take this pattern back off from the back. Make sure that even after you've traced it, that your fabric is nice and tight. You might have seen on the other piece that I held up to you before that I had masking tape around the frayed edges so that I was keeping these from fraying. I have so much extra fabric that even if it frays a little bit, it's still going to have my Nutcracker intact for when I cut it out. So I don't need to go through taping it, but if you want to tape it, you are welcome to. And if you're going to use the whole piece of fabric, then you probably should put a little bit of masking tape just to kind of keep anything from fraying. So now that I have this, when you're starting a more complicated design like this Nutcracker, you want to always start with the details. So we're going to start with the eyes, we're going to start with the nose, the cheek, we're going to start with all the details inside the face, and then we're going to go back and fill in the face with some kind of skin tone. So I have my punch needle, and I'm going to use some of my black impeccable yarn from Loops and Thread. And I'm going to thread the punch needle with the black in order to do the eyes. So again, you'll keep seeing me do this as we switch colors and keep going with the project, that I'm going to put the threader through the punch needle. I'm going to put the punch needle in between those two wires, or sorry, put the yarn in between the two wires. Oops, flew out. There we go. And then I'm going to gently pull on this little flag that pulls the yarn all the way through the punch needle. And then the last step of the punch needle threading is to get this little piece through this hole and coming out the back of the punch needle. And then I can pull on the yarn down here in order to kind of give me a shorter tail or a longer tail. You can pull on this or pull on this to kind of give yourself some sort of tail. You do want to have some slack in your yarn. If you have your yarn very tight right here, it's going to be pulling out the stitches as we put them in. So now I'm going to be doing the eyes, and you don't want to drag from one color. You don't want to drag from one space to another because you're going to leave a giant piece of black yarn crossing those eyes. So we're going to just do this eye, we're going to cut off, and then we're going to do this eye and cut it off. So we have to do them separately. So I'm going to poke through, I'm going to grab the tail, and about this much of a tail is just fine. If it's longer or shorter, that's fine as long as you have a tail. And then I'm just going to do a couple stitches around this spot to make it look like a little bit of a round eye. You'll notice me turning around my hoop so that I can kind of make that circular motion with my stitches. Definitely want to fill one or two punches in the middle too. And you can stuff as many stitches as you want to in this space. But when you are finished, you go to the back, you grab this yarn, pull your punch needle away from your work, and then this loop that you have that's pretty long right here just gets cut off. And see how that just blends into all the other stitches back there? And then I can pull this off. My punch needle is still threaded, yippee! So I don't have to rethread it to do the next eyeball, but I am gonna pull a shorter tail. And then I'm gonna go and do the same thing for the next eye, where I'm going to punch in. I'm gonna pull the tail so that the tail is on the side with all the loops. And then I'm going to do a couple stitches around by turning my hoop. And I have these cute little eyeballs. There we go. Make sure that you put a couple of stitches in the center so that you can't really see any of that monk's cloth. Then I'm going to grab this on the other side and I'm going to pull that loop and pull my punch needle away. And when I cut that loop down, it detaches from the rest of my work. Yeah, I can absolutely show the needle threading again. That's definitely a big part of this. So these are the two eyes, and I think this is the only thing that I'm going to do in black. You can look at the picture that goes along with this class to kind of see the color scheme, but I'm going to do these black eyes. I'm going to do the nose and the cheeks in kind of like a little pink. I'm going to pick a skin tone, whatever skin tone you want. I'm going to give him an orange wig, and I'm going to do some white too. So we might not get to do all of this together, but I have more to show you. And then I'll show you at the very end how we go all the way around and make that black outline, because this black outline isn't punch needle. This black outline is actually kind of like embroidery. So I'm going to show you how to use a yarn needle to go around and do that as well. So let's switch colors, which means I am going to thread my needle again. So I'm going to pull this out. And next I'm going to do my cheeks and my nose. So you can decide if your cheeks and your nose are going to be a bright red or if they're going to be, so this one has bright red nose, bright red cheek. You can do a little pink. You can do just a little bit of a different coloration from whatever skin tone your Nutcracker is. So you can decide if it's a very, very rosy cheek or if it's just going to be a pink cheek. So I'm going to go with a little bit of a pink. And here comes my threading process again with my punch needle, pulling some of the yarn out of my skein. This is another loops and thread yarn. So all the colors that I'm using are in the shopping list for today's class. So here is the wire with the flag. The double wire goes through the top metal part of the punch needle, comes down through the base. Then we have these two wires that are split. And I'm going to stick the yarn in between these two wires. Then I'm going to gently pull on this flag and pull that yarn up through the hollow punch needle. I'm done with my threading tool. And then the last step of threading is going to be to take the end and go through this last hole on the punch needle so that your thread or your yarn is coming back through the back. And then I have a threaded punch needle ready to go. And it feeds off of the skein over here and it just keeps coming out. And I just keep pulling this to make sure that it's nice and loose so that I don't pull out my stitches. So now I'm going to go for the nose. And here's the first stitch on the nose. Remember to pull your tail. And I'm going to make that yarn a little shorter. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a couple stitches to make that shape of the nose, kind of like a little teardrop nose. And that's probably all I need. Pulling this loop, cutting this loop, and cutting that tail so that the pile all kind of match in the same size. Doesn't it look scary on this side? It looks pretty frightening on this side so far. That's okay. Looks great on this side. So I'm going to do the cheeks next. So it's just a couple stitches here and there. There's a lot of color changes with the Nutcracker, but that's also what's going to make it really fun and very festive. So I'm going to pull the tail. I'm going to do that couple of cheek stitches. And you probably want to do all of the same color at the same time so you don't have to rethread your needle. You do need to rethread your needle when you change colors. So if you do all of the pink at one time, then you only have to thread once, all of the purple, all of the blue. So you can kind of cut down on the number of times you need to thread, which is obviously something that's a little bit harder. So a question in the chat asks, are you holding the tail with your left hand for the first couple of stitches? That's a good question because I don't know if I do that. So I will tell you on the next cheek. So the question was, are you holding the tail with your left hand? Okay, let's see. So I punch through, I grab the tail with my left hand, and I pull the tail a little bit shorter, but then no, I do not. When I'm holding my fabric right here, I'm not holding the yarn that's on this other side. I am kind of putting my fingers right here and right here, like a letter V, around where I'm stitching, just to kind of push the fabric a little bit tighter right there, but I'm not holding on to the yarn. So good question. I wasn't really sure until I checked, but yeah, I'm using my fingers back there to kind of hold. I'm pressing the fabric up towards you, just to kind of keep it nice and tight. Obviously, keep your fingers out of the way of your punch needle so that you don't punch yourself, because it will hurt. It is a needle. It can be a little bit sharp, and I don't want you to punch yourself. That's not a good thing. Grabbing the tail with my fingers, cutting it, cutting down the original tail. And I have my nose, I have my cheeks, and I'm ready for my overall skin tone. So there's lots of different skin tones for you to try, whichever one you want to do. And I'm going to rethread, and I'm going to go through, and this will be a good opportunity for me to show you how to add another color and go around all these details that we already have going on here. So here we go with another new color. I'm putting the flag with the double wire through the punch needle. I am taking the yarn, putting it in between the two wires, gently pulling that flag through the punch needle, and then I'm taking the end of the yarn through the hole in the punch needle one last time to have my whole thing threaded. There we go. So another question asks, is it possible to use the same size needle in all the projects you do, or do you recommend different size needles? So that is a great question. This large needle with the wooden base that I'm using that comes from Michaels, it's in the section with all the embroidery and yarn and stitchery kind of stuff. So this needle is made for yarn. There are smaller needles that are made for embroidery floss instead of yarn. So if you want something even more intricate than what we're doing, especially if you're going to write letters like words or something like that, the yarn might be too hard to write words with. So you might want to switch to embroidery floss. So yes, you can use the same monk's cloth, but you can use different size needles. Also, there are different needles that come in different lengths, because you can imagine that this length is helping me decide how fluffy these loops on the back are, because how far I push this punch needle through tells me how long these loops are going to be. So if my punch needle barely goes through, the loops are going to be shorter. They're going to be closer to the fabric. If this punch needle metal part is longer before it gets to this base, then you're going to have even longer loops. So then you can make something that kind of really fluffs and really kind of flows with very, very large stitches. So there are different punch needles to use, but I like this size and I like using yarn. It does go faster than embroidery floss to finish a project. And really, I like the way that this yarn looks. What we're doing today with punch needle is kind of the very basics of tufting, where you can really start getting into bigger size projects and do something called rug tufting, where you can make your own rugs using a tufting tool that's even faster than the punch needle tool that we're using right now. So you'll notice that I switched colors and I'm starting to go around the space that I'm going to be filling in. So whenever I do one of my sections, I do like to do an outline first and then start going in and filling in. And you'll notice that every time I'm doing my stitches, the opening part of my punch needle is kind of facing in the direction of where I'm going, because the pointiest part of the punch needle is what's going to be going through the fabric each time. And so I want to direct the yarn in the direction I'm going by continuing to keep the opening of the punch needle in that way. So now that I'm here by the cheeks, I am going to stitch pretty closely to the cheeks. And I'm going to put a little bit of skin tone in between the cheeks and the nose so that you can kind of tell the difference. It's going to be a subtle difference. You can punch needle, you can put stitches over top of stitches. So I went down and I came back up in the same spot. And that obviously didn't do any damage. It's okay to go over them as long as you're going over the same color. You don't want to cross from one side of the face to the other over some other color, because that will show up with that color yarn that might be distracting from your pattern. So I'm going down in between the cheeks, doing a couple stitches, and then coming across the top of the cheeks and over to where our mustache is going to be. And now I've gone all the way around with my skin tone. So I'm going to fill in the next layer, going in towards the center. And when I get to my eyebrows, you can choose right here to go around the eyebrows, or you can keep following the line along the top of the skin. I'm going to go around the eyebrow. And I'm definitely leaving that blank canvas there, or the Monkscloth, in order to come back with a color, whichever color I decide for that eyebrow. And then I can go and fill in this spot over here. And now that I've done my outline, it's really fine for me to kind of jump around and fill in as I go, as I want. You don't have to keep going in a circular pattern. When I'm going around this eye, you'll see me do a couple stitches just around that eye. And if I leave any blank spaces, then I can pull a stitch. And like I said, you can go over top of stitches you already have. So you can always go back and add more if you can see too much of your Monkscloth. So that looks like it's pretty well filled in around that eye. I'm going to go up here and fill in the part above his eyebrow. Let me know again if you have any questions. And I have a couple of other punch needle classes that I've taught before. For Halloween, we had a Beetlejuice tufted pillow class where we did it on a larger, instead of doing a circular hoop, we did a square frame so that we were able to make an even larger piece. And then we were able to turn that into a pillow when we were done. So that's a video that's already available on Michael's YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch that at any point. If you really start getting into this, there are ways to upgrade this craft for sure. When I first started punch needling, I was like, oh my gosh, this is magic. How do you just push something down and it magically makes stitches? Like, that's pretty amazing. It's so much faster than embroidery because you don't have to go up and down and come back up. You just go punch, 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 punch. And the fabric is doing all the work for you by grabbing those loops. So it's really fast and it's very soothing to me. I love this physical feeling of punching this needle into this fabric. I can't even explain to you that it makes me very, very happy. So I enjoy this craft quite a bit. And once I started getting the hang of it, then I was like, how are people making those rugs? I want to know how people are making those rugs. And there is something called a tufting gun that literally you pull a trigger and it shoots yarn through the fabric, and it is amazing. So I may have run to Michael's and bought myself a tufting gun. And then I needed a frame, and then I started making some rugs too. And this is just how all hobbies, you know, go crazy. You start with a little, this is like the gateway craft, is doing some hand punch needle, and then you start tufting rugs. The next thing you know, you're making rugs for everybody you know. So watch out. It's a fun hobby to get into. All right, this is looking great so far. I'm pretty excited by it. Oh, I may have skipped some parts, so good thing this is still threaded. I need to go back and fill that in. Also on my design, here's a little bit of his neck. So I do want to do these in that whatever skin tone color you're using as well. So I need to go back and fill in his neck. It is addictive, so be careful. You are warned, but also go for it because it's fun. We all need some fun. All right, I need to go back in here. So another question asks, if you use embroidery floss, how many strands do you use? That's a great question, and it depends on your punch needle. So there are teeny tiny punch needles where you might only be able to use 2 strands, but for the most part, I think if you're using a decent size punch needle, that you can use all 6 strands of the embroidery floss at the same time. So you shouldn't have to go through the process of taking strands out, again, like you would in an embroidery project, which again is going to save you a little bit of time. Got to get the rest of his skin over here. And then I'm going to be excited to show you some ways that we're going to kind of use a little bit of embroidery with yarn to do the outline and also to do some of the sprinkles on his hat, because his hot cocoa has some sprinkles in it. All right. So you can imagine that I'm going to keep going with this, and I'm going to do white for his mustache and his goatee and his eyebrows, but then I'm going to put orange hair on him just because I think it looks fun and very festive to have that orange hair. I'll do a purple mug, but you can do whatever color mug you want to. If you want different colors, or if you want to stay with more traditional kind of Christmas colors, you can. On this one, I made a different size mug. I didn't put any whipped cream on the top. I just made a really big mug and then put some extra detail on the mug. So I even added some dots and do some different things. On this one, I made him super nutcrackery by adding some 2 front teeth. So this Nutcracker didn't even know he wanted 2 front teeth, but I gave them to him. So you're welcome, Nutcracker. So you can make this your own. Please feel free to kind of expand upon what I've already given you to work with. But now that you kind of have the hang of how to do the rest of this, I am going to switch over and show you some more of those details I was talking about. So here is another one of my nutcrackers in process. I have a couple that I can pick from. And I'm going to add some whipped cream, and then I'm going to show you how to add the sprinkles by doing a little bit with our yarn needle as well. So if you have questions about the first part and what we've been working on, let me know, and I'm happy to come back to this guy. We'll keep him here in case we want to come back to him. But now I'm going to add the whipped cream on the top of here, and then we'll go back and add sprinkles together to that whipped cream. So now I'm going to have some white yarn, and I'm going to thread my punch needle. And this is exactly the part I was worried about for myself. Is my threading tool has been buried now on my desk, and I should have done a better job of keeping track of it. So we'll see if I can do this without my threading tool. Hold, please. I had a feeling I was going to do this. Okay. Gonna have to be creative with my threading. So could you show your needle threaded. Yes. Once I get it threaded. All right, I'm being creative with how I'm threading the needle this time. I'm throwing a plastic needle down here. I don't think it's gonna fit. Uh-oh, Megan. All right. I will come back to that.
I bet you're looking over it.
I'm looking over it.
Try one more time. Try to look where your other thread is at.
Look where my other thread is at.
Where's your balls of thread?
My yarn.
Your skeins of thread.
Over here. These ones.
Make sure they fall on the floor.
I know. This is like so typical of me with this. I usually have, it's funny, I usually have like 3 different threading tools nearby because I do this. I just get so excited and I just keep like moving things. Oh, guess what? We're in luck, everybody. I found it. Thanks, Felicia. You know, it's Friday.
I promise I've done it myself. That's why I meant to look on the floor.
Things happen. All right, here comes the threading. So could you show your needle threaded? I sure can, especially now that I have this threading tool. You can make your own of these because believe me, I have. Just take a thin piece of wire and fold it in half and put a little bit of masking tape right here. That's how I usually keep several of them nearby me because as you see, I like to throw things while I'm crafting and that's how you lose things, you know? So I'm going to put this yarn in between my 2 wires. I'm going to gently pull on the flag to make it go through the hollow needle. I am putting this on my computer so that next time I say, where is it? It's on my computer. All right, I am then taking the thread and going through that last hole. And that is what your threaded punch needle looks like. So your threaded punch needle, this part down here is attached to the skein. And then it comes up through the metal part and goes to the back so that it's hanging down through this last hole. So that's what a threaded punch needle should look like. All right, I'm going to add some whipped cream to this guy. So I punch through, grab the tail, pull the tail a little shorter, and you can kind of make up your whipped cream pattern, make it curved, have some little dollops. Again, you could turn this into a cupcake. It doesn't have to be hot cocoa. You could have a donut, or you could have a crown if you want a traditional nutcracker. So that part's up to you. My fabric's a little bit loose in my hoop. I'm going to fill this whipped cream in, and then I'm going to add sprinkles. So when I add sprinkles, I'm going to be using my embroidery, my yarn needle, and I'm going to be making some stitches with yarn in order to make those sprinkles. So I'm outlining the whipped cream, pulling a little bit more of my yarn so that it's not too tight and it doesn't take out my stitches. I'm going to follow that path again, adding stitches. And once I get going, it's just a really fun, repetitive task that kind of has that fidget aspect of like doing the same thing. I kind of like the sound too. I could do some ASMR punch needle, right? I'll be famous on the interwebs. Okay, just a couple more stitches. Notice how I am going over top of some of the other white I already did, and that's just fine. I'm just trying to fill in the space as best I can. There we go. Okay, so with this last stitch, I'm going to grab the yarn and I'm going to pull it away from my hoop to make a larger loop. I'm going to cut that larger loop. And now I have whipped cream on the top of his little mug. And as I said before, we are ready for a yarn needle. So there's lots of different kinds. They're metal, they're plastic. These are in the kids section. And again, the reason why I like these ones are because you can get like 15 in a pack. Again, I might possibly lose this while I'm going. So I like to have 15 of them in case I happen to lose one. But it has a really large eye in the needle so that yarn can go through. So that's what you're looking for. And I'm going to pick out some colors for my sprinkles. I definitely want purple. So when I'm cutting some yarn for my sprinkles, I'm just going to cut a couple inches. This is probably about 8 inches, and I might not even use all of that. I'm going to thread my yarn through this plastic yarn needle. There we go. And I'm just going to pull a little bit of a tail through that. And I'm going to go to the back of my stitches, and I'm going to pick a place and come up through. Before the way through, I'm going to leave a tail because I'm going to tie this and secure it. This is the bad side of my work, so I'm going to be covering this up at the very end, so I don't care what this looks like. But when you make a sprinkle, you just want to kind of like leave a little bit, maybe 1.5 centimeters apart from each other, and just pull a little stitch like that to make a sprinkle. And then I'm going to go to another place. So a question in the chat says, if the thread doesn't catch on the material, what's wrong? What I'm worried about for you is that you have the wrong fabric. So you have to have Monkscloth, or else your loops will not be catching. If you use the wrong kind of fabric, a punch needle will not work on anything else but Monkscloth. So that's what I'm a little bit afraid of for you. So check that you have the right fabric. And if not, everything else seems, So if the thread doesn't catch on the material, what's wrong? That's one of the questions in the chat. So I made 3 sprinkles, and I'm going to tie these together. And again, I'm fine with having knots on the back of here. Not a big deal because I'm going to be covering this up, and I'm going to cut it down. I'll see if I can keep helping you with your.
So Megan,
Yes.
just as part of that question, some reasons could be how, if you're trying to pull the needle out too far,
True.
if you're pulling too, if you're not punching close enough,
Yes.
it'll also cause it to not catch.
Right.
So just make sure, depending upon how you are using your needle, if you are pushing it in far, not too far, and making sure that you're not pulling out too far.
So at the beginning, make sure that your tail is unhooked and your tail is loose. That could be another thing that might be stopping the stitches from going. And then like Felicia was saying, you don't want this yarn right here to be tight, because if it's tight, it won't let you make stitches. It'll take them back out. So it won't let you if this is too tight. So they won't be going through your fabric. Another thing, like Felicia was saying, is that once you've grabbed your tail and put it onto the bad side, don't pull your needle out too far. So watch how I barely take it out, just enough to scrape over the material and push back down. I pull it up just barely enough and scrape and push back down. And it should be collecting over here some loops. And if loops aren't collecting on this side, then I'm afraid that you don't have the right fabric. But if you got the one that's listed, you should be okay. So let's see if that helps or if that changes anything for you. But let's do a couple more sprinkles while we're waiting. And we'll do a little bit of our outline with our embroidery too. I'm going to take some blue sprinkles since this guy has blue hair. Or I could take some orange sprinkles. That could be fun too. And I'm just going to cut a couple inches of the yarn, thread it through my yarn needle, and go through here and pick out a spot for another sprinkle or two. I tend to try and make my sprinkles go in different directions. I'm keeping a tail so that I can tie this off later. Here's a sprinkle. Maybe here's a diagonal sprinkle going this direction. And maybe another one going up and down over here. You could also put sprinkles into his hair if you want him to have a cool wig that has some hair sprinkles. You can do that. Maybe his hair is made of cotton candy or ice cream or something. That's why it's blue. You just never know. I'm going to tie a knot here just to keep the sprinkles intact. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of the black outline. And we're coming up towards the end of class, so if you have more questions, let me know. And I will show you how to cut this off and kind of finish the project into an ornament. I'm going to cut a little bit of a longer piece of black because there's going to be more black outline stitches than there are for the other parts. Threading my needle. And then I'm going to do an outline stitch. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to bring my needle up right in this corner between his cheek, his beard, and his wig. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail and I'm going to make one stitch. So I'm going to like make one stitch here and push down. And because with my outline stitches, I'm not going to come back to the same place, I'm going to go ahead and tie a knot right here to keep my yarn from coming through. So I kind of anchored that to my material. And then I'm going to do what we call a back stitch in embroidery, which means I'm going to go forward a little bit of space and I'm going to take the stitch and go back to where I left off. And then I'm going to come up forward of where I was last time. And I'm going to go back to where I was. And so this is creating just this really nice black outline all the way around my nutcracker and just kind of really gives it a pop, I think. And I'll do this and stitch all the way around. When I get up to the mug, I'm going to stitch through the mug as well to kind of define the mug. And you might have seen on one of my earlier nutcrackers that you don't have to use black. So I use blue to outline this mug. So that's a color choice up to you of what looks best with your nutcracker and the colors of yarn that you've been using on your project. But right now I'm doing stitches along the side of my punch needle loops and my stitches. But when I get to the mug up here, you're going to see how I really just can go through the stitches that are already there with my yarn. So I'm going to do one tiny stitch right here across the blue. And then I'm going to go across his forehead, separating him from his mug. So I'm punching up my needle through here. And it's fine for this to be a longer stitch since it's very straight. So I have one really long piece of thread going across here. And I'm going to come back, kind of like a back stitch in embroidery, and fill in all of that part. And then I have just a little bit over here. And with my mug, I'm going to do another line that's going to go across here. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm even going to go inside of this little circle. And when I'm done with all of my outline of my nutcracker, then you're going to end up with something that looks like this guy. And remember, I decided not to put his uniform on. So here is our final touch of how we're going to turn him into an ornament. You can take him off your hoop. I've done all my embroidery. I've done all my stitching around there. I don't do stitching to highlight the face. I kind of like leaving that the way it is and just doing the black outlines on the actual outline. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut this down. But when I cut it down, I'm going to cut at least an inch around, sometimes even more. So at least an inch around the shape of the nutcracker. And if you have a hot glue gun, now is the time to plug it in. So let me heed my own advice and plug in my hot glue gun. And I'll let that heat up. While this is the bad side. It's a little freaky looking. This is our good side. I'm gonna cut strips. And the reason why I'm cutting these is because we're going to take this fabric and we're going to fold it over top of our work like this. So we need some of these little pieces of fabric cut so that they can bend and fold, and we can fold them backwards and kind of get the end of our design on the end of what we're working on. And then we're going to glue these pieces down. And then we have one final step too, where we take any color piece of felt, whatever color you want to, it can be gray, white, black, can be one of the Nutcracker colors. And we're going to want to cut a piece of felt that's going to go nicely with our Nutcracker. And I can use my original template to cut myself this Nutcracker shape. Or for time's sake right now, since we're running out of time, I can make a weird shape that I will then go back later and actually fix when I have a little more time. So after I pull all of these up and hot glue them, then I'm going to have this last piece of felt over top of all that will kind of hide and mask some of the work I've done. So you can see on the back of this one, you can kind of see on the sides all those pieces that I pulled up and kind of tightened in order to give it that outlined shape. And then I have a final piece of felt that kind of hides all of that. Also, if you have a type of ribbon, in order to turn this into an ornament, you're going to take a couple inches of ribbon, whatever you think works best for the size of your Nutcracker. And before I glue this last piece of felt down, I would put these two things underneath and glue them in between the felt and the Nutcracker itself. And then you're going to be able to have a beautiful ornament to hang or to give to someone or to put somewhere special in your room. So I'll just show you a little bit of this, and then I do think we're just about out of time. So if you have any last minute questions, let me know, but I'll show you how I'm going to pull these up. And I'm going to pull these pretty tight. My glue gun's still heating up, but I'm going to pull these pretty tight, and they can overlap like crazy back here. And I'm going to hold them down and pull them tight to really give the shape of the Nutcracker. So cut all these pieces where you're going to need to cut in order to tuck them and hide them behind in order to give it that shape going around. And feel free to cut down any extra fabric if you want to, glue fabric on top of fabric to make it work back here, because all of this is going to get covered up one final time by that last piece of felt. And you're going to have that little bit of ribbon in between the felt and all the punch needle material in order to turn it into an ornament. So I'm on my way to making several Nutcrackers. So I'm going to keep working on these, and I'll be posting some of my finished projects on my personal Instagram, which is the number 4M Coleman. If you're able to make one of our Nutcrackers, I would love to see what Nutcracker you made and what colors you chose and how you decided to design it. So please share with us on Instagram at Learn with Michaels. Tag us, and maybe we'll see your Nutcracker appear so we can all ooh and awe over your Nutcracker. But thanks for joining us. This was really fun. I hope that you learned a new craft with the punch needle, and I can't wait to see you and craft again with you soon. Bye, everyone.